Your testimony matters. Your story matters. The way that you are able to vocalize and put words to the way that God has operated in your life matters. And this isn't just a cute idea, it's truly written into your biology and the creation of who you are. At day 15 after conception, so before anyone can even know that you exist, there's a process that happens called gastrulation, in which the cells really start to separate into what will become the toes versus the fingers, skin versus bone, etc. And on this embryo, two divots form. One is what will develop into your jaw, and the other one is what will develop into your pelvis. And essentially, over the course of the next 8.5 months, the spine grows between the two of those, and they develop again into the throat and the pelvic space. We can see a lot of this fascial connection that remains today as an adult in something as simple as a jaw massage. Whether you do that from internally or externally, you do a test and retest of, say, a squat hold or some sort of hip mobility test, there can be a significant shift just with 2 or 3 minutes of that fascial release. The throat diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm are really one in a theory of a host of diaphragms in which the throat, the respiratory, and the pelvic diaphragm work together to stimulate the vagus nerve. And the idea is that these should move fluidly together, and yet when we see disorder or tension or dysfunction in the way that these diaphragms operate together, we'll tend to see not only throat issues come up or tensions around this area of the body, but also pelvic issues, GI or digestive issues, or even low back pain. Those things tend to operate together at a physical level. Now, there's also an interesting phenomenon where we tend to see a correlation between sexual freedom or restriction and freedom or, again, restriction to speak or to vocalize. So a few ways that we can look at that, for example, would be the Freudian theory of oral fixation, which really kind of depicts the stunting of development that can happen in youth when there's an issue around sense of self-identity or sexual development. We also tend to see vocal paralysis in sexual assault victims, especially in childhood sexual assault victims. And we can even attest to some of the generally very outspoken nature of the sexual liberation movement. Now, when we look at those facts and look at those observations within a biblical context, rather than ignoring it, we can actually align perhaps to be a little bit more on mark with how God designed this interconnected relationship to be. And perhaps the question here is if the exchange of our sense of self-identity, even if that is sexual, can actually lead us to a greater sense of freedom in our testimony. Perhaps purity and an understanding of God's role for our sexuality is the ultimate freedom. And perhaps culture today, modern culture, actually just has slightly missed the mark from that and has skewed what freedom actually is. And we see this idea form because of this, when we're looking back at this gastrulation process, that our identity as a daughter or son of God, as being male or female, and the physical ramifications of that actually relates to the way that we articulate our testimony, the way that we relate to God as a father. And perhaps it is an awakening of our identity that can be produced simply by sound, simply by practicing the vocalization that comes in using our voice. It's vibration that actually causes movement and motion in our body. Our voice essentially is a production of sound waves or of vibrations. We talk about vocal cords, but it's really more like vocal folds, where we have these folds in our throat, and how much we open or close those folds and the volume at which we press air from our diaphragm and lower down is what produces actually the pitch and the tone and the volume of our voice. So of course, people who sing or are musically inclined have a particular articulation of that process. In public speaking, we learn to speak from the diaphragm. And the damage to the vocal cords or the vocal folds come when we're not synchronizing the way that those diaphragms operate together. So when we're talking about a sense of identity, when we're talking about truly spiritual freedom in our walk with God, we have to integrate a conversation about our ability to vocalize and to speak up and to share our testimony.